and welcome to the U.S. Center. If everyone wants to take their seats, we're going to get started. This event is U.S. Senators discuss congressional support for climate action. And now I'm very pleased to introduce from the great state of Maryland, Senator Ben Cardin. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Whoa. Good morning. It's good to feel at home in the U.S. delegation here. We traveled a long way, and it's really great to be here. We're proud of the U.S. participation at COP28. I'm very proud of my Senate colleagues that are with us. For many of us, we've been to several of the COP meetings. This is my 5th COP meeting. We are here, 7 strong, bipartisan, to show our support for COP28. I want to introduce my colleagues that are here. You're going to hear from each one of them. Senator Tom Carper, who chairs the Environment and Public Works Committee. This is a delegation strong on the environmental issues. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who is one of the senior members of the Appropriations Committee and has a lot of ranking memberships and very engaged, representing the great state of Alaska, which is, of course, very concerned about the climate issues. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who chairs the Budget Committee, is on the Judiciary Committee, on the Finance Committee, and is one of our great leaders on the environmental issues on carbon capture. So we are pleased that he's with us. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware, particularly important because he chairs the subcommittee that has the appropriations for all these different issues. So any complaints about money, it's Chris Coons you need to talk to. He'll take care of that. Senator Ed Markey, who's been working on these issues, gave us the pioneer legislation on climate. Senator Brian Schatz, part of our leadership team, serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, serves on so many other committees, Appropriations Committee. We got an all-star lineup here, and we are so proud. Ambassador Strong's nice to see that our ambassador's here. We got a great crowd. So let me just make 1 or 2 comments. We recognize the urgency of this moment. I serve as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I represent the great state of Maryland. We'll talk about how climate change is impacting the way of life in my state. So I am very concerned about this issue from an environmental point of view and as a senator from Maryland. But I can tell you, as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, this is a matter of national security. We are seeing countries and communities that are losing their political stability because of climate change, threatening their way of life, threatening their ability to feed their families, threatening their ability to literally live in peace. We're finding that more and more climate migrants are occurring. People who cannot stay in their homes because they can't feed their families or their lands are being taken away by rising sea levels. These migration issues are affecting all of us, every country, including the United States of America. The circumstances are urgent. COP28 is our opportunity to take stock, where we've been and where we need to move in order to achieve our goals. And yes, the United States has a proud record. In our own country, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we took the investments necessary to meet the transition to the new climate-friendly way to energize our country and for us to be more mindful of our own commitments on energy. And we've taken a global leadership through our development assistance programs to make sure other countries, particularly the Global South, has the capacity to deal with the new challenges. We all must do more. And that's exactly why we wanted to have this opportunity to tell you what we are proposing to deal with the energy issues, to deal with the challenges of deforestation, to deal with the ocean and how we can improve the ocean, to deal with food insecurity. There's a lot of areas that we can work on. And I'm proud that our delegation here have come here not only to take stock, but to provide leadership so that we can meet our goals in our own country and to the global community. So let's go on with the discussion. I'm going to introduce our moderator for this panel. It's a little bit unusual the way we're going to do it. We're going to have two different panels, and she'll explain that. Assistant Secretary J.R. Littlejohn, hails from the great state of Maryland. As I've said many times, a proud graduate of Morgan State University.
Well, good morning, everyone. All right. Today we have the distinct honor to be here with 7 U.S. senators, all with sustained and incredibly strong records of leadership on climate and environmental issues. Chairman Cardin, thank you for leading this congressional delegation to COP28. It means a great deal to many. Senators Murkowski, Coons, Markey, Carper, Whitehouse, and Schatz, thank you for being here. Now, I lead the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, or OES for short, at the State Department. Created by Congress in 1973 and formally established by the department the following year, OES has a record of nearly 50 years of robust work on both behalf of the United States to protect the Earth's oceans, lands, biodiversity, air, and people. OES leads U.S. efforts in over 400 treaties, international agreements, and international organizations, efforts that underpin a sustained interest in the Bureau's work by Congress and by the Senate in particular. Throughout these 5 decades, OES has relied on and enjoyed bipartisan and bicameral support and has benefited from the leadership of the U.S. Congress on our issues, especially from the senators here today. The world is currently grappling, as we all know, with a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and a pollution crisis. They are all connected, and none can be managed or solved by one country or even a group of countries, or, in fact, by countries alone. It's an all-in effort needed from governments at all levels, including local and subnational governments, the private sector, academia, non-governmental and advocacy groups, and all of us here today. We approach this triple crisis with 3 guiding thoughts in mind: turning ambition into action, not just negotiating treaties, but implementing them as well; taking care of people, making sure that the most vulnerable among us are not left behind as we address these crises; and looking to innovations, including new technologies, because the only way we will meet our climate and environmental goals is through innovation and discovery. And we're making progress. Last year, the U.S. Senate ratified the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. That's right. That's right. Its global implementation will help to avoid as much as 0.5 degree Celsius of warming by the end of the century. We thank all of the senators here for their support in seeing Kigali through. Thank you. This year, OES led U.S. efforts to negotiate a high seas treaty, which we signed along with over 80 other countries at the United Nations in September. This agreement will create a coordinated approach to establishing marine protected areas on the high seas, which will absolutely be critical to meeting our shared goal of conserving or protecting at least 30% of the global ocean by 2030. And OES, yes, again. Finally, OES is currently leading the U.S. team negotiating an international agreement on plastic pollution that aims to eliminate plastic pollution waste by 2040. That is an ambitious goal, and we are working hard to complete the text by the end of next year. And a final nod and thank you to Congressional Appropriations. I'm looking around. Yes. In fiscal year 2023, OES obligated nearly $1.5 billion in congressionally appropriated climate, working with our spec colleagues, environmental, and other OES programming funding. Beyond the substantial investments in climate, this funding also supports a new plastic pollution public-private partnership, aids Pacific Island states through the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, tackles issues in the Arctic, and helps protect environmental defenders, including indigenous peoples and local communities, many of whom are on the front lines protecting environmental resources like forests that are key to lessen the impacts of climate change. Now, these are just a few of the many ways congressional interest and action are integral to U.S. climate leadership. So with that in mind, I am honored to introduce the first round of the senators on stage, Senators Cardin, Murkowski, Coons, and Markey, and have them share their own brief remarks. And in the second half of the program, we will invite Senators Carper, Whitehouse, and Schatz on the stage to hear from them. Senators, will you please take the stage? Well, I'm happy to dive right in with a few questions. Senator Murkowski, I'll start with you. Alaska and the Arctic in general are facing some of the first and most severe impacts from climate change. Permafrost thaw, coastal and riverine erosion, and severe flooding pose tremendous threats to Arctic communities, with many already facing relocation and retreat, and others seeing significant changes to their way of life. You and Senator Coons recently introduced landmark legislation, the National Coordination on Adaptation and Resilience for Security Act. Can you walk us through the key objectives of this bill and also your work more generally on resilience in the Arctic?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and to my colleagues at this very, very important COP. You really can't have a discussion about what we are seeing with climate change without an understanding and appreciation as to what is happening in the Arctic, an area where we're seeing warming at 2.5, sometimes 3 times faster than in other parts of the globe. And what that means to us, as you've pointed out in your comments, in terms of increased erosion, as you see the sea ice receding and the waves and the water coming up to the shore in ways and areas that we haven't seen before, the melting of the permafrost, which adds to a level of methane emissions that is very difficult to calculate and to appreciate. So this is our reality. This is our reality in the U.S. Arctic. And it is a focus that I have taken up throughout my tenure here in the Senate. Some have suggested that it might be a little bit ironic that someone from an oil and gas producing state is involved in the climate debate. I find no irony at all in it. We must be involved in it because we are impacted, we see it, we face it, and so we must be involved in the solutions as we move forward. So some of the solutions. NCARS. What is it? The national, I always have to look to what we have actually named it, the National Coordination. They really like the title here. We have a theme song for our legislation, apparently, too. It's the National Coordination on Adaptation and Resilience for Security. So what we're doing is we're trying to provide for a level of coordination. We have some 17 different agencies that have some level of oversight when we're talking about climate. So what we're seeking to do is effectively have a clearinghouse here, to have a coordinator whose responsibility is first and foremost to look at all of these challenges and with a focus through the lens of climate and climate resilience. And so it's a clearinghouse, it is a strategy, it is an implementer, coordinator. It recognizes that when we can move to be more prepared in the event of disasters, and I'm not talking about the impact of severe storms, severe weather conditions. We're also talking about slow-moving hazard. That becomes part of that definition. So if we can work to address some of what we see coming at us in ways that can provide for a level of protection, whether it is a seawall or whether it is other mitigation efforts to put in place. This is what this measure is designed to do. Working with Senator Coons, I have learned that he doesn't do anything unless it is bipartisan, and I'm typically in, maybe not typically, I am always in the same boat, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make something that's going to make a difference. And I think this is yet one more area and effort where we can put a spotlight on the problem with real assignments as to how we can move forward in a more coordinated manner.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. All right, Senator Coons, you often speak of the need for the United States and our allies to harmonize our climate policies. What do you mean by that, and how are we doing so far?
Well, that specific point is the European Union has a carbon border adjustment mechanism that is coming at us. We adopted the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most significant investment in combating climate by any country in history, and has already deployed more than $300 billion and is on target to employ hundreds of billions more. We have a disagreement over which is the better approach, regulatory versus incentives. We're trying to negotiate around critical minerals, and we have to find a way to work together. As we are working together to support Ukraine in their fight against Russia, so too should we work together in the fight against climate and find a way to come up with a common CBAM that provides tariff protections for our industries that are remarkably clean. I introduced a bipartisan bill with Senator Kramer. Senator Murkowski is one of the many co-sponsors, called the Prove It Act, that would simply collect the data to prove what we already know, or what we certainly believe, which is that American steel and aluminum, glass, and fertilizer are produced in the lowest emissions way in the world, and so too are our allies in Japan and Canada, in Europe and the UK. But that the imports into all of our economies, from Russia, from India, from China, are very emissions intensive. There's a whole suite of bipartisan bills I've worked on, the one that Senator Murkowski referenced, one with Tom Tillis on low carbon concrete. I founded and lead the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, which is 14 senators, Republicans and Democrats. That, I hope, gives some encouragement to folks who think that in Congress all we do is disagree, and that the policy trajectory changes dramatically with elections. Elections do have consequences. I have a strong preference for our current president. But I do think one of the messages we've tried to share with folks from other countries that we've met with is the $1.5 billion that you talked about in appropriations from the committee that I chair and Senator Graham is the ranking member on. Those continued investments in sustainability, in conservation, in combating climate change will continue going forward.
Thank you, Senator Coons. All right, Senator Markey. Now, despite domestic shifts towards decarbonization and clean energy deployment, and despite a recent IPCC report indicating an increased need to rapidly cut greenhouse gas emissions, U.S. natural gas and oil exports broke records in 2023. As we approach the 2-year mark of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, how can we support energy security through efforts to decarbonize and reduce global emissions?
Well, we're in a crisis. All the evidence points that the planet is dangerously warming above any previous historical analysis. And there is some good news. Good news is last year, or by the end of this year, 2023, more money this year is going to have been invested in solar than oil for the first time in world history. And it's never going to go back again. That's good news. In the United States this year, we're going to deploy 34,000 megawatts of solar. In 2009, our total historic amount was 2,000 cumulatively. 34,000 this year. 8,000 new megawatts of wind this year. 42,000 new megawatts of renewables this year. And we know that it's coming on faster and faster. The IRA is driving it. That's the good news. The bad news is that in the 1980s, we used to have 3 $1 billion storms per year in the United States. In the 21st century, we're averaging $20 billion storms per year. So it's getting worse and worse and worse. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia created a panic whereby the LNG industry in the United States saw an opportunity to dramatically expand its footprint. We lifted in the United States the ban on export of natural gas in 2015. The natural gas industry sees a big opportunity. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, says that Europe is already massively overbuilding their LNG capacity. But it's being driven inexorably by investments already made by the natural gas industry. If all of the export terminals that are planned in the United States are actually constructed, it will actually offset 1/2 of all the gains from the IRA. So we just can't allow it to happen. Mainly because in Europe, they are now moving very rapidly towards renewables, towards energy efficiency, towards other ways of generating their energy. And so if we want to save the planet, if we want to be the leader, if we want to be exporting these technologies that we are developing because of the IRA, we have to stop this export of LNG around the world and help these countries to identify and develop their own indigenous renewable resources. We cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. We cannot tell the rest of the world you should move towards a renewable energy future if we ourselves are spreading this LNG poison for the planet around the world. So we have a chance right now to be the global leader. We're going to have to square up all of our policies, especially our export policies post-Russia invasion of Russia, to target those technologies that are going to be best, not just for the European community, but for Africa, for Asia, for South America in the years to come. And then the United States will, in fact, have been the leader, not the laggard, in pointing the world in the direction that they should go. Otherwise, the consequences are going to be catastrophic.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Markey. Chairman Cardin. As you noted in your opening remarks, Congress has taken significant action, but most of those actions have centered on the home front and focused on reducing emissions. As chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I know you are attuned to the international community's concerns about the finance gap and the constant reminders that the United States is not meeting its financial commitments. How would you respond to these critics?
Well, first, let me say that we need to do more. There's no question we have to meet our international commitments. And we recognize the political hurdles in regards to the Green Climate Fund and this new fund created from the loss and damage debate during COP. We recognize that. These are challenging for us to do direct appropriations to these types of funds because of the political nature of the way the Congress is organized. But let's back up a little bit. The United States has found many ways to lead the global community in helping particularly those countries that are challenged to meet the needs because of their own economic circumstances. We've been there. USAID is a major global player in the climate agenda. Feed the Future is dealing with resiliency for farmers that are challenged because of climate change. That's a U.S. initiative. Billions of dollars we do in that area. We're a leader in regards to financing. Our Development Financing Corporation invests billions of dollars into climate-related programs in the global south. We are dealing with creating solar manufacturing facilities. We're dealing with renewable energy sources. The Millennium Challenge Corporation provides significant funds to deal with climate-related issues. And you total all that up, in the last 2 years alone, that's over $8.5 billion that U.S. taxpayers have been contributing to the global community to meet these needs. Is that enough? No, we need to do more. We recognize that. But we have been the major global player in trying to help other countries deal with their needs. And we do it in a way that helps the local economy, that provides the economic futures. We don't use them to capture them in debt. We don't take their wealth of materials. We do it in a way so there's a future for that country, not only to meet their climate responsibilities, but to meet their economic needs for their populations. That's how the United States has been very aggressive in these areas. We look for other ways that we can do this, and yes, we should meet our obligations in regards to these funds.
Well, how about we have another round of applause for the first panel? Thank you, Senators. We'll have the second panel please join us on the stage. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So, now please join me in welcoming to the stage Senators Carper, Whitehouse, and Schatz. Round of applause. All right, I'm going to go direct. So, Senator Carper, as chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, you have been a leader on each of the recent historically significant pieces of climate legislation adopted into law over the past 2 years. Would you please discuss the significance of these enactments for our efforts to fight climate change?
Next question, please. Let's give her a round of applause. She's a lot of fun and she's doing great work. How many of you have ever been to Delaware? I mean, actually got out of your car, didn't just pay the toll on I-95, didn't pay any sales tax. You went to the best, we have more 5-star beaches in Delaware than any place. How many have actually been to Delaware? Really? Oh, good for you. God bless you. That's great. I'll tell you something about the state of Del Peter said, Tom Carver, why are you so concerned about climate change? What's the big deal? And it goes back to all politics is local. And Delaware is the lowest lying state in America. Our state is sinking and the waters around us are rising. That's not a very good combination. So we feel like we need to do something about it. I'll give you some idea what that might be. I want to just talk a little bit about leadership. Do we have any military, any former military here? Any veterans? Okay, well, let's give them a nice round of applause for our veterans. Thank you. I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. And I was 17 years old when I raised my right hand and took an oath to defend their country and Constitution as a midshipman. And ended up in Southeast Asia and served for a long time, retired Navy captain. I learned about leadership when I was just a kid. And one of the things I learned about leadership is we lead by our example. It's not do as we say, but rather do as we do. And what we sought to do in the Congress, the leadership of the gentleman we're really honored to be here with today, and the lady especially, Lisa, here today. What we're trying to do for the United States is provide leadership by example. And there used to be a guy named Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. And he robbed banks, this was probably about 100 years ago, all over the Northeast. And finally he got caught. And they took him to trial. He was standing in front of the judge, and the judge said, Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks? And he said, Your Honor, that's where the money is. Well, the reason why we in climate change, the reason why we go after emissions from cars, trucks, and vans is because that's 35% of the emissions in this country. The reason why we go after emissions from our power plants is because that's about another 30% of the emissions, carbon emissions in our country. And the reason why we go after emissions of like manufacturing operations, think asphalt plants, think steel mills. The reason why we do that, that's another 25%. And the legislation that we have passed, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, we go after emissions from those sources. We actually focus on those. And I'll tell a story. There's a woman named Mary Barra. Mary Barra, some of you have heard of her. She's one of the top business leaders in the country. She leads General Motors. I met her at the Detroit Auto Show, probably 10 years ago. And at the Detroit Auto Show, every year they pick the car of the year, the SUV of the year. And the car of the year that year, 10 years ago, was a Chevrolet Volt. And it was a hybrid. It got 38 miles on a charge. 38 miles on a charge. When I plug in my electric vehicle in the garage in my house, it gets 300 miles on a charge. But Mary Ball, I called her a couple of years ago, and I said, we need for you at GM to provide leadership and reduce the emissions from your cars, trucks, and vans, and actually provide leadership. She said, if I do that, the fellow who was president then will cut our legs out from under us and make us pay for that. She said, I'll wait for the next administration, and then we will do something. But she said, I'm all in on electric. That's the future. That's where we got to go. That's where we got to go. And she said, in order to get people to buy the vehicles we're going to build, we have to have 300-mile range. She said that's on the industry. She said we have to also be able to charge your batteries in like minutes, not hours. She said that's on the industry. And she said the other thing we need is charging stations all over the country. All over the country. So that people don't have to worry about range anxiety, charge their vehicles wherever they come. And then she said, and that's on you. And I said, on me personally? And she said, well, not you personally, but on the Congress and the government. And if you look at the bipartisan infrastructure law that the president signed into law about a year ago, it has the biggest, largest climate change charge package we've ever done in an infrastructure bill, including money to build literally hundreds and hundreds, thousands of charging stations all over the country, and they're being built today. The other thing, there's something. Let me hear you say. I'm going to ask you, this is the audience participation part of the show. Let me hear you say Kigali. Again, once more with feeling. Kigali. There you go. I've talked about Kigali for years. My wife Martha said, "Stop talking about Kigali. Nobody cares." And I said, well, honey, they do, because it deals with reducing refrigerants from our refrigerators and freezers and that sort of thing. And it's they are like something like 1,000 times worse than carbon dioxide for global warming. So this is really a big deal. And we have enacted the treaty. We've agreed to the treaty, ratified the treaty that is going to phase down these refrigerants over the next 15 years. And just one thing's worth half a degree Celsius. One thing that we've done that's worth a half degree. Another thing that we've done is money for solar, buying down the cost of deployment of solar, money for just all kinds of things. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, we actually go after methane. And when you think of methane, think of cows. Think of cows flagellating in their fields, eating, pooping, and creating a lot of manure. And it's a huge source of methane. Where we take our garbage and everything, our landfills and that sort of thing. Huge charge, the source of methane. Methane is 80 times more powerful, more potent than carbon in terms of climate change. And we've done huge work, and including this guy right here, right beside me. Huge work in terms of going after methane, and again, it's 80 times more. So the idea, Willie Sutton. Why do you rob banks, Mr. Sutton? That's where the money is. And what we've done in the Inflation Reduction Act, what we've done in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we've gone after some of the biggest sources of carbon. We're providing leadership. That's what countries like ours should do. We've created a lot of this problem over the last 100 years, and now it's our obligation to lead us out of it. And that's exactly what we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Thank you. All right, Senator Whitehouse. The industrial sector is responsible for about a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Manufactured goods are also traded around the world, which means that emission reductions in one country may be partially offset, if that country imports emissions-intensive goods from another country. The European Union and the United Kingdom are moving forward with a policy they call Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. What is your view of this policy, and how should the United States respond?
Before I answer that, can I just have a word of appreciation to you for the work you've done on ocean plastics? We've been together from Panama to Palau. You've been a powerful voice in the Nairobi Agreement. We have the chance to get rid of ocean plastics, keep leaning in. We have to make that work, and you've been a very important part of that. So thank you on the ocean plastic work.
OAS team thanks you, sir.
So the CBAM, I think, is perhaps the most emissions-reducing prospect we have out there in the firmament of options. This is my 6th COP. Every time I come to a COP, we get pledges, we get ambition, we get carbon emission increase, and we get methane emission increase. So we've got to drive a little bit more change here, and I think the CBAM stands to do it. And there are two terrific things about it. One, it actually puts a price on pollution. And people can pledge and have ambitions until they're blue in the face, but in an economic environment, if it's free to pollute, you're going to keep doing it. So the discipline of the price signal is super important. The second thing about it is that it has a knock-on effect in our domestic politics. Because once American industries have to start paying this tariff, they're going to have a whole new outlook on domestic pricing. There are things that we can do so that American companies will not have to pay the tariff. But that means more stepping up on climate. And I am all for more stepping up on climate. So my argument to our EU friends is on the CBAM, no mercy, no delays, no exceptions, no waivers. Stand by your guns and let us step up. In the same way that we stepped up with the IRA and made an enormous difference in subsidizing the transition, this is their version of that, and we need to be standing up ourselves. I'll close with two things that I want to flag for everybody here, because the Biden administration has done two very good things that I don't think have been acknowledged enough. The first is the government-wide social cost of carbon that the Biden administration has applied throughout the executive branch of government. It just went live out of EPA at $190 per ton, which is a very serious carbon price. And Shalonda Young and Ricky Rivez at OMB have directed your State Department and every other agency of government to implement that, not just the EPA. So as that gets implemented, that's a big deal. It sends a huge signal. It's an important step by the Biden administration. The last is the Methane Enforcement Task Force. Thanks to the good efforts of Chairman Carper, we got some very good work done on methane emissions. The methane rule that the EPA just passed is very helpful, but what we need is to have the enforcement capability of the United States finding methane leaks, which we can do now by satellite, not waiting until the end of the year, but thinking about a methane leak like a fire department would think about smoke pouring out of the window of a house. If you were a fire department that filed a report at the end of the year as to how many houses had burned down, you would be a really terrible fire department. So we've got to upgrade our game, so we're treating methane leak like smoke pouring out of a window, and we are deploying immediate resources to shut off that methane leak. To Eddie's point, you can't preach temperance from a bar stool. If we stink at cleaning up our own methane mess, it's very hard for us to ask the rest of the world to clean up its methane mess. So the Methane Task Force working effectively is not only good for us in America, but it also sends a message to the rest of the world. We've got to shut down methane leaks everywhere in real time with real clout.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Shantz. There continue to be discussions about the trade-offs between addressing climate change and boosting the economy. Now that we are almost a year and a half from the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, what is your assessment of its impacts and the degree to which other countries should pursue similar approaches?
Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for the question. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act, objectively speaking, is exceeding the most optimistic projections. And a number of the things that we said it was going to do, not just on the carbon emission side, but on the high-quality union jobs side, right, on the domestic manufacturing side, which were admittedly aspirational when we were enacting the policy, are actually happening. And so part of the purpose of this COP, for me, is a very simple message to our counterparts. We just did a really exciting thing. You've been correctly admonishing us as we go to these COPs about our lack of action. Even though we're in global leadership, we didn't have the legislative proposals to sort of back it up. We didn't have the laws to back it up. Now we've done the thing, right? And so now we're telling all of our counterparts, and what I think that it's a little bit funny is some of our counterparts were so irritated that we didn't take action, and now they don't like how much action we took because it's kind of messing with their internal economic opportunities. And we're saying, hey, just do it yourself, and it's going to be great. I want to make a couple of little points about the way this bill came about. And of course, everybody in this room, not just the members, but a lot of people in this room had a hand in it. But it was very simple. The old model for sort of environmental organizing, but also for putting together legislation, was very much the tyranny of or, right? We should do wind or solar or geothermal, or we should be focusing on environmental justice, or we should do conservation, or we should be bipartisan, or we should be all Democrats, or. And what we decided, both because the magnitude of the problem and the magnitude of the opportunity is so vast, but also because, frankly speaking, how do you get to 51 votes? Well, you do all the things, right? So that everybody's excited that their little thing got into the bill. But as you look at a climate strategy to try to get us to 1.5, you got to do all the things. And some of them aren't going to work. You just don't know which ones. And some of them are going to work beyond your wildest imaginations. And so it's a very simple message, but it's also a political organizing tool. Do all the things. Don't think of the thing that you are particularly excited about as the one thing that needs to get done. Be excited for everybody else's line of effort, because I think that's really what we're going to need to do on policy, but it also helps the politics. I see a number of young and youngish people in this room. And so I wanted to just say one other kind of mindset shift that I think is really important for the climate movement, which is we got to be about building things. And when I first got into political action, and I see an old friend from Hawaii here, I was involved in the Save Sandy Beach Coalition, right? And it was to prevent an inappropriate development in my favorite beach. And then there was the Save Sunset Beach Coalition, ditto, right? Not my favorite beach on the other side of the island, but still an important thing. But a lot of us got into the environmental movement to save a precious place. And so we configured a lot of laws and, frankly, our political ecosystem around stopping bad stuff. And so now we have a thicket of laws and regs and processes and habits, political habits, that are around stopping stuff from being built. Good stuff and bad stuff, because statutes can't contemplate what is a good or a bad thing. They're all subject to the same rules and laws. And so we as an environmental movement have to be about building things. And we got to talk to each other about that. We got to see what that means. We have to envision that, for instance, in the state of Hawaii, if we're going to be all clean energy, we're going to see the windmills, right? It's too small not to see the windmills. We're going to see the solar farms. And so we've got to be about building things. One final point. The number one enemy of climate action, we all know, is the fossil fuel industry. The number two enemy is despondency. And so allow our collective outrage to turn into action. But I have seen, and I don't know whether it's social media or what, but I have seen our collective outrage to turn into a kind of frozen mentality around being outraged and then giving up. Turn that outrage into anger, turn that anger into action, because we owe it to the next generation. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Senator Schatz. How about another round of applause for this panel? So, with that, I'm going to take a point of personal privilege to ask if the chairman would like to say a closing word as we close the program.
Thank you so much to our amazing panel. And if all of our panelists would gather on the stage for a group photo, that'd be great. And everyone else, please remain seated. Thank you so much.
That was my closing comments.
It was a good one.